Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I've got another incredible Reddit update story for you. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload. I pretended to be dead for 3 hours to avoid talking to my landlord, and now I'm legally trapped in my own apartment. Let me write this out fully, making it as long and engaging as possible. Okay, so this happened 3 days ago, and I'm only now emotionally stable enough to type it out without screaming into a pillow. I need you to understand the full context here, because if I just jump to the part where I'm lying on my kitchen floor playing corpse while my landlord pokes me with a broom handle, you're going to think I'm insane. And maybe I am, but you weren't there. You didn't live through the slow boil of psychological warfare that led to this moment. You didn't experience the 6 months of escalating tension, the passive-aggressive notes, the random inspections. The time he let himself into my apartment at 7 a.m. on a Sunday because he thought he smelled gas, and then spent 45 minutes inspecting my bathroom grout with a flashlight, while I stood there in a towel questioning every life choice that led me to renting from a man who collects antique doorknobs and refers to his property management empire in the third person. His name is Gerald. Gerald owns the building. Gerald also lives in the building, in the basement apartment, which he converted from what was originally a storage unit and is now a windowless cave of taxidermy and conspiracy theory bulletin boards. I'm not exaggerating. The man has at least 3 stuffed raccoons in his living room and once tried to convince me that the city water supply was being chemically softened to make us more compliant. I nodded and smiled because my lease wasn't up for another 8 months, and I had already put down a security deposit that I was pretty sure I'd never see again. Gerald is maybe 65, built like a deflated basketball, and has this habit of appearing in places he shouldn't be. Not in a supernatural way. I was just checking the mailroom at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday way. The mailroom is 20 feet from my front door. My front door has a window that Gerald likes to peer through while holding a clipboard and wearing reading glasses he doesn't actually need. It started small. A note about my recycling being insufficiently sorted. A comment about how my welcome mat was facing the wrong direction for feng shui purposes. Then it escalated. A hallway light bulb outside my apartment went out, and when I texted him about it, he showed up at my door 20 minutes later with a ladder, a Bible, and a 40-minute lecture about how lead bulbs are a government plot to track our brainwaves. I stood there nodding while he replaced the bulb and asked me if I'd noticed any unusual pigeon behavior lately. I hadn't. He seemed disappointed. But the real breaking point, the moment where my sanity started to develop hairline fractures, was the inspection schedule. Gerald decided unilaterally and with zero legal basis that he needed to conduct monthly wellness checks on all units. Not quarterly, not annually, monthly. And he didn't mean a quick peek to make sure the pipes weren't leaking. He meant a full CSI-style walkthrough where he opened cabinets, commented on my spice organization, and once asked me why I owned so many pillows, as if 3 decorative pillows on a couch was evidence of a psychological disorder. I tried to push back. I cited tenant rights. I mentioned that in our state, landlords need to provide 24 hours notice before entering a unit except in emergencies. Gerald's response was to laugh, pat my shoulder, and say, "We're all friends here, buddy. No need for all that legal mumbo-jumbo." Then he opened my closet and asked if I was planning on having children soon because my shoe collection suggested a certain instability. I started avoiding him. I took the back stairs. I checked the peephole before leaving. I developed a sixth sense for when he was in the hallway, a kind of primal instinct, like a deer sensing a predator. I could hear his orthopedic sandals slapping against the linoleum from 3 floors away. I knew his schedule. I knew he did his building rounds every Tuesday and Thursday between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m., and again on Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. sharp. I planned my entire existence around these windows. Grocery runs at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, laundry at 8 p.m. on Fridays, social life non-existent because I was too busy being a tenant survivalist. But 3 days ago I messed up. I messed up so catastrophically that I'm still processing the fallout. I had been working from home. I do data entry for a company that sells industrial-grade rubber seals, which is exactly as thrilling as it sounds, and I lost track of time. It was a Thursday. It was 2:15 p.m. I was in my kitchen making a sandwich, humming along to a podcast about medieval siege warfare, completely oblivious to the mortal danger I was in, and then I heard it. The slap 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 of sandals on linoleum, the jangle of keys, the clearing of a throat that sounded like a garbage disposal eating a spoon. He was outside my door. I froze. My body went into full fight-or-flight mode, except there was nowhere to fight and nowhere to flee. My brain, operating on pure panic and zero logic, presented me with 3 options in approximately 0.3 seconds. Option 1, answer the door and endure whatever fresh hell Gerald had cooked up this week. Option 2, hide in the bathroom and pretend I wasn't home, which would definitely result in him letting himself in because emergency wellness check. Option 3, play dead, just drop right there on the kitchen floor, go full possum, commit to the bit so completely that even I started to believe it. I don't know why I chose option 3. I genuinely cannot explain the mental calculus that led to this decision. Maybe it was the 6 months of accumulated stress. Maybe it was the fact that I hadn't slept well in weeks because Gerald had recently installed motion sensor lights in the hallway that flickered all night and cast shadows across my bedroom that looked like a man holding a clipboard. Maybe my brain just short-circuited and defaulted to the most theatrical possible solution. Whatever the reason, I didn't think, I just acted, I dropped, I didn't ease myself to the floor. I didn't carefully arrange myself in a plausible position. I full-on collapsed like I'd been shot by a sniper. My sandwich went flying. The podcast kept playing, now narrating the fall of Constantinople while I lay face down on my kitchen tile with my arms splayed out like I'd been struck by divine judgment. I heard the keys jangle. I heard Gerald mutter something about young people and their unpredictable schedules. I heard the door open, and then I heard him step inside. "Hello," Gerald's voice echoed through my apartment. "Maintenance. I need to check the pipe thing in the bathroom pipe thing." I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I pressed my face into the cold tile and tried to look as corpse-like as possible, which is difficult when your heart is hammering so hard you're pretty sure it's visible through your shirt. I could hear him walking around, I could hear him poking at things, I could hear him opening my fridge and making a disapproving noise at my yogurt selection. "Organic," he muttered, "hippie nonsense." He was getting closer. The sandals were slapping their way toward the kitchen. I could smell his cologne, which I can only describe as what if a pine tree was also a funeral home. I could feel his shadow fall over me. And then I felt something I will never forget as long as I live, the tip of a broom handle poking me in the ribs. "Hey," Gerald said. "You, floor guy, you alive?" I didn't move, I didn't twitch. I summoned every ounce of willpower I possessed and remained completely, utterly, maddeningly still. The broom handle poked again, harder this time, right in the kidney. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap up and explain that this was all a misunderstanding and I was just very tired and also maybe having a mental health crisis. But I was committed. I was in too deep. There was no graceful exit from this situation. The only way out was through. "Well," Gerald said, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. "Well, that's not good. That's not good at all." He poked me a few more times, varying the location like he was conducting some kind of morbid percussion performance. Ribs, shoulder, the back of my knee, which almost made me kick him in the face and blow the entire operation. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I thought about every embarrassing thing I'd ever done, every text I'd sent at 2 a.m., every time I'd waved at someone who wasn't waving at me, every job interview where I'd said "you too" when the interviewer told me to enjoy my lunch, and I used that shame to fuel my immobility. I was a statue, I was a rock. I was a man who had made a terrible decision and was now going to see it through to its logical conclusion or die trying, which, given the circumstances, felt weirdly appropriate. Gerald stepped back. I heard him fumbling with his phone, I heard him dialing, and then I heard him say the words that made my blood turn to ice water. "Yes, hello, 911, I need to report a death, I think, maybe, I'm not sure. He's on the floor and he's not moving and I poked him with a broom and he didn't react." "Yes, I'll hold." He called 911, and my landlord called 911 because I was pretending to be dead. This was not part of the plan. The plan, to the extent that there had ever been a plan, had been to wait for him to leave, then get up, brush myself off, and go back to my extremely normal life as a man who had never faked his own death to avoid a conversation about water pressure. But now there were emergency services involved. Now there were paramedics. Now there was going to be an official record of this. I was lying on my kitchen floor, supposedly dead, while my landlord explained to a 911 operator that he had discovered my body during a routine wellness inspection and that he had poked me with a broom for science. I had maybe 10 minutes before the paramedics arrived. 10 minutes to decide whether to maintain the charade and face the consequences of a full emergency response, or to leap up and explain that I was actually fine and this was all a hilarious misunderstanding, and please don't bill me for the ambulance. My brain, which had already proven itself to be an unreliable narrator in this story, chose a third option: keep going, just keep going, see what happens, treat it like an experiment in human behavior. Worst case scenario, I get a very expensive lesson in why you shouldn't pretend to be deceased. Best case scenario, I honestly couldn't think of a best case scenario, but my brain was no longer accepting logical input. So I kept lying there. I heard Gerald pacing around my apartment, still on the phone, now telling the operator about my extensive pillow collection and how it might be relevant to the cause of death. I heard sirens in the distance. I heard them getting closer. And then I heard the heavy footsteps of multiple people entering my apartment, accompanied by the professional calm of emergency responders who had definitely seen weirder things than this, but probably not many. "Sir, can you step back, please?" a paramedic said. "We need to assess the situation." Of course, Gerald replied. I found him like this, just lying there, very dead looking. I've been poking him with a broom for about 15 minutes and nothing. Not a twitch, very committed to the role, this one. I felt hands on me, professional hands. Hands that knew how to check for a pulse, how to assess responsiveness, how to determine whether a person was actually dead or just extremely committed to a bit. A paramedic rolled me onto my back. I kept my eyes closed. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I tried to look as authentically deceased as possible, which is a skill I never imagined I'd need and now can't stop thinking about in the shower. "Sir," the paramedic said right next to my ear, "Sir, can you hear me?" I said nothing. I did nothing. I was a slab of meat on a kitchen floor and I was going to ride this wave all the way to shore or to the morgue, whichever came first. "He's got a pulse," another paramedic said. "Strong, actually, and he's breathing. Respiration is normal." "Could be a seizure," the first one said, "or a neurological event we need to transport." No, 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 no. Transport meant hospital. Hospital meant doctors. Doctors meant explaining that I was actually fine and had just been avoiding my landlord, and now I was going to be committed to a psychiatric facility, and also I was definitely going to lose my security deposit. I needed to end this. I needed to wake up, to spring to life, to deliver a convincing explanation for why I had been lying motionless on my kitchen floor for 20 minutes while emergency responders assessed my vital signs. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Not physically. Physically I was fine, as the paramedics had just established, but psychologically, I had gone too deep. I had crossed a threshold. There was no way to wake up from this that didn't end with me looking like the most unhinged person in the history of tenant-landlord relations. So I made the only choice that made sense in my fractured, panicked mind. I kept pretending. They loaded me onto a stretcher. I stayed limp. They strapped me in. I stayed limp. They wheeled me out of my apartment, through the hallway, past Gerald's open door where I caught a glimpse of his taxidermy raccoons watching me with their glass eyes, and out into the afternoon sunlight where an ambulance was waiting with its doors open like the mouth of some great beast ready to swallow my dignity whole. I was loaded inside. The doors closed. The engine started. And I lay there, eyes closed, heart pounding, wondering how I had gone from making a sandwich to being emergency transported to a hospital because I didn't want to talk to my landlord about the building's water pressure. The ambulance ride was maybe the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every bump in the road, every turn, every acceleration sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. The paramedics were talking about me like I wasn't there, which I technically wasn't, because I was committed to character that had no awareness of its surroundings. They discussed possible causes. They mentioned conversion disorder and psychogenic non-epileptic seizures and maybe just a really weird guy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and tell them that I was a normal person with a normal job and a normal life who had just made one extremely abnormal decision under extreme stress. But the longer this went on, the harder it became to break character. It was like a social quicksand. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank. We arrived at the hospital. I was wheeled into the ER. I was transferred to a bed. I was surrounded by nurses and doctors and the general controlled chaos of an emergency department. A doctor shone a light in my eyes. I had read somewhere that pupils contract involuntarily in response to light, so I tried to relax my eyes completely and hope for the best. He checked my reflexes. He poked my feet with something sharp. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I was giving the performance of a lifetime, and the audience was medical professionals who were increasingly concerned and confused. "All vitals are normal," the doctor said. "No signs of trauma, no neurological deficits that I can detect, but he's completely unresponsive. Let's get a CT scan and some labs." A CT scan. They were going to CT scan my brain because I was pretending to be unconscious. The absurdity of this situation had reached a level that my brain could no longer process. I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines, while medical professionals tried to figure out what was wrong with a perfectly healthy man who had decided to play possum because he didn't want to discuss his lease agreement. If I had told myself this story a year ago, I wouldn't have believed it. I would have assumed it was a creative writing exercise or a very specific hallucination. But it was real. It was happening. And I was still too deep in the bit to stop. The CT scan was a new challenge. I had to remain completely still while being slid into a giant humming donut that made noises like a robot having an existential crisis. The technician gave me instructions before the scan, not knowing that I was actually conscious and just extremely stubborn. "Try to stay very still," she said. "Don't move at all." I thought, "Lady, you have no idea how good I am at this." I was slid into the machine. The magnets whirred. The machine clicked and buzzed. I lay there like a slab of beef, eyes closed, breathing shallow, wondering what my brain looked like on the scan and whether the radiologist would notice that it was the brain of a man who had made a series of increasingly poor decisions. The scan came back normal, obviously, because there was nothing wrong with my brain except maybe a slight deficiency in impulse control. The doctor was baffled. The nurses were baffled. I overheard them discussing possible malingering and factitious disorder, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had graduated from weird medical mystery to possible psychiatric case. They were going to call in a psychiatrist. They were going to evaluate my mental state, and at some point, someone was going to ask me direct questions that I couldn't ignore forever. But here's where things took a turn I absolutely did not anticipate. While I was lying there in the ER, still committed to my performance, my phone started ringing. It was in my pocket, and in the quiet of the hospital room, the ringtone, which I had set to the opening bars of Eye of the Tiger, because I thought it was motivational, cut through the silence like a knife. Everyone in the room froze. The doctor looked at the nurse looked at my pants. My pants were playing Survivor at full volume. "Is that his phone?" the doctor asked. "I think so," the nurse replied. They exchanged a look that I couldn't see but could absolutely feel. It was the look of two medical professionals realizing that their unresponsive patient might not be as unresponsive as he appeared. The phone stopped ringing. Then it started again, same ringtone, same volume, same undeniable evidence that I was either a very unusual corpse or a very unusual living person. "Sir," the doctor said, and his voice had changed. It was less clinical concern and more suspicion. "Sir, I need you to open your eyes right now, this is important." I didn't move, I couldn't, I was in too deep. I was the Titanic of bad decisions and I was going down with the ship. "Sir, we know you're conscious, your pupils responded to light during the CT scan, and your phone is ringing, please open your eyes." They knew, they definitely knew, the game was up. The curtain had fallen. The fat lady was singing Eye of the Tiger and I had no choice but to face the music. I opened my eyes, the light was blinding, the ceiling was white. The faces looking down at me were a mixture of relief, confusion, and barely suppressed irritation. The doctor, a middle-aged man with the exhausted eyes of someone who had seen too much, leaned over me and said, very slowly and very carefully, "Sir, can you tell us why you were pretending to be unconscious?" I opened my mouth. No words came out, my throat was dry, my voice was gone. 3 hours of silence had apparently reset my vocal cords to factory settings. I tried again, a croak emerged, I swallowed, I tried a third time. "My landlord," I whispered, and the words felt like they were being dragged out of me by force. I didn't want to talk to my landlord. There was a pause, a very long pause. The kind of pause that happens when someone says something so absurd that the universe needs a moment to process it. "Your landlord," the doctor repeated. "Yes, and you pretended to be dead, unconscious." I was going for unconscious. "The dead thing just happened." "The dead thing just happened," the doctor said, and I could hear him trying very hard to maintain his professional composure. "Sir, do you understand that you were transported by ambulance? That you underwent a CT scan? That multiple medical professionals have been trying to determine what's wrong with you for the past 3 hours? I didn't think it would go this far." "You didn't think it would go this far," the doctor echoed, and now there was a definite edge to his voice. "Sir, this is a serious misuse of emergency medical services. Do you have any idea how much an ambulance ride costs? Do you have any idea what you've put your landlord through? He's been sitting in the waiting room for 2 hours convinced that he found a dead body in his building." Gerald was in the waiting room. Gerald had followed the ambulance to the hospital. Gerald had spent 2 hours believing that I was dead because of his wellness check, and now he was probably planning to turn my apartment into a memorial, or worse, use this as justification for even more frequent inspections. The horror of this situation was expanding exponentially, like a balloon being filled with pure anxiety. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it more than I'd ever meant anything. "I really am." I panicked, I didn't know what to do, I couldn't face him, not again, not after everything. The doctor sighed. It was a long, weary sigh, the sigh of a man who had heard many strange stories but never quite this strange. "I'm going to need you to speak with our psychiatric liaison, and then you're going to need to talk to your landlord, and then you're going to need to figure out how you're paying for this ambulance ride, because insurance doesn't cover pretending to be dead to avoid social interaction." He left. A nurse came in and gave me water and a blanket and a look that suggested she was going to tell this story at every party for the rest of her life. I sat there, alone in the ER room, waiting for the psychiatrist and dreading the conversation with Gerald and trying to calculate whether I could sell my car to pay for the medical bills. But here's the part where it gets really bad, the part that I didn't see coming, the part that has me writing this at 3 a.m. because I can't sleep and I can't stop thinking about it and I genuinely don't know what to do next. Gerald came into my room, not the waiting room, my actual hospital room. He had apparently charmed or bullied his way past the nurses, which is a skill I didn't know he possessed but absolutely should have anticipated. He stood in the doorway holding a cup of coffee from the hospital cafeteria, wearing a jacket that had at least one visible raccoon hair on the shoulder, and he looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You're alive," he said. "Yeah," I replied, surprise. He took a sip of his coffee, he didn't sit down, he just stood there staring at me and I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. Gerald was thinking, Gerald was planning. Gerald was doing whatever it is that landlords do when they realize their tenant has faked a medical emergency to avoid them. And I had a sinking feeling that it wasn't going to end with a friendly handshake and a renewed commitment to mutual respect. "You know," he said finally, "when I found you on that floor, I thought you were dead. I really did. I called 911, I gave them your information. I told them everything I knew about you. Your name, your age, your lease start date, your emergency contact, your everything. Gerald, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for any of this to happen, I just panicked." "I know," he said, and he smiled. It was not a comforting smile. "I know you panicked and I know why. You've been avoiding me for months, ever since the wellness checks started, ever since I noticed the pillows, you've been running from me like I'm some kind of monster. You're not a monster, Gerald. You're just intense, very intense about doorknobs and pigeons and my spice rack." He waved his hand dismissively. "Spice rack, schmice rack, that's not important anymore. What's important is what happened after I called 911. See, when the paramedics arrived, they asked me a lot of questions, and I answered them, honestly. Because I thought you were dead, and when someone is dead, you tell the truth, you don't hold back, you give them everything. My stomach dropped. I could feel it physically dropping, like an elevator with a snapped cable, plummeting through my abdomen and landing somewhere in the vicinity of my knees. What did you tell them, Gerald? He took another sip of coffee. He was enjoying this. He was absolutely, positively, without a doubt enjoying this moment, and I was powerless to stop it. I told them about the lease, he said. About how you signed it 6 months ago, about the terms, about the security deposit, about the special clauses. Special clauses? Oh, you know, the ones in the addendum. The ones you initialed without reading, because who reads the addendum, right? Everyone just signs on the dotted line and hopes for the best. I had initialed something. I remembered initialing something. It was a separate page attached to the lease with a paperclip, and Gerald had said it was just standard boilerplate about building maintenance responsibilities, and I had been so eager to get the keys and move in that I had scribbled my initials without so much as glancing at the text. I had told myself I'd read it later. I had never read it later. I had forgotten it existed until this exact moment. Gerald, I said, and my voice was barely a whisper. What was in the addendum? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, my lease, or a copy of it. He unfolded it with deliberate slowness, savoring every second of my mounting terror. He cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses. He began to read. Addendum B, Section 4, Subsection C. In the event of tenant death or incapacitation, the lease agreement shall be transferred to the landlord's designated heir or assignee, and the tenant's estate shall be responsible for all remaining rent payments for the duration of the lease term, plus a reasonable administrative fee for processing the transfer. Furthermore, the unit shall remain under the control of the landlord's estate until such time as the lease term expires or the unit is re-rented, whichever comes later. I stared at him. I blinked. I stared some more. Gerald, I said, I'm not dead, I'm right here, I'm alive, you can see me being alive. Ah, he said, holding up a finger, but here's the thing, the paramedics declared you dead at the scene. Or rather, they declared you unresponsive with no apparent vital signs, which, for the purposes of the addendum, triggers the same clause, and I filed the paperwork. I filed it while you were in the ambulance. I filed it with the county. I filed it with my lawyer. I filed it everywhere it needed to be filed, because I thought you were dead. And now, according to the legal documents that are currently being processed, you are dead, or at least you were dead. And once you're dead in the eyes of the law, it's very complicated to become undead. That's not how it works, I said, and I could hear the panic in my voice. That's not how any of this works. You can't just declare someone dead because they were lying on the floor. Actually, Gerald said, and he was smiling again, that terrible, triumphant smile, I can, because you signed the addendum. And the addendum says that my determination of your status, when made in good faith during a wellness check, is legally binding pending medical confirmation. And the paramedics' report confirms that you were unresponsive with no apparent vital signs. So legally, for about 45 minutes you were dead, and during those 45 minutes the transfer clause activated. And now your apartment, your lease, your security deposit, your everything belongs to my estate. Or rather to me, because I'm not dead, yet. I was out of bed, I was standing, I was shouting. I was doing all the things that a person does when they realize that a 3-hour performance art piece has resulted in them being legally deceased and dispossessed of their home. This is insane, this is fraud, this is something, I don't know what it is, but it's definitely illegal. Is it? Gerald asked, and he was so calm, so infuriatingly calm, like a man who had been planning this for years and was finally seeing his vision realized. Or is it simply a very unusual lease agreement that you signed without reading? A lease agreement that was reviewed by my attorney and found to be completely enforceable under state law. A lease agreement that makes no distinction between actual death and determined dead during wellness check, because, frankly, I never imagined there would be a difference. I sat back down on the hospital bed. My legs couldn't support me anymore. My brain had reached maximum capacity for processing horror and had simply shut down, leaving me in a state of blank, buzzing shock. So what happens now? I asked. Now, Gerald folded the lease and put it back in his pocket. He finished his coffee. He straightened his jacket. Now you have a choice. You can fight this in court, which will take months and cost thousands of dollars and probably end with you being evicted anyway because, let's be honest, you pretended to be dead to avoid a conversation and then rode an ambulance to a hospital while wasting everyone's time and resources. Or you can accept the situation. You can continue living in the apartment, my apartment, under a new agreement, a month-to-month agreement, with slightly different terms that include, shall we say, more frequent wellness checks. And maybe a conversation about your pillow situation. And definitely a conversation about your spice rack, because I have thoughts, I have many thoughts, and now, my friend, you have all the time in the world to hear them. He turned to leave. He paused at the door, he looked back at me, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't malice or triumph. I saw loneliness. I saw a man who had been waiting for someone to notice him, to engage with him, to be part of his weird little world, and who had finally found a way to make that happen. It didn't make what he'd done okay, it didn't make it legal or ethical or anything other than completely deranged. But it made it, in some small way, understandable. Gerald didn't want to be my landlord. Gerald wanted to be my friend, and he had engineered the most elaborate, bizarre, legally dubious friendship trap in the history of property management. Tuesday, he said, 2 p.m., first wellness check under the new agreement. I'll bring the clipboard, you bring the openness to feedback, and maybe some better yogurt. That organic stuff is garbage. He left. I sat there. The psychiatrist came in eventually, and we had a very long conversation about stress management and impulse control and why faking medical emergencies is generally frowned upon by society. I agreed to attend some sessions. I signed some forms. I was discharged with a stack of paperwork and a bill that made me want to fake my death for real this time, and now I'm home. Or rather, I'm in Gerald's home, which happens to contain all my stuff and also happens to be the place where I will be receiving wellness checks for the foreseeable future. Because I pretended to be dead for 3 hours to avoid talking to my landlord, and now I am, in the most technical and legally binding sense possible, trapped in my own apartment. So yeah, that's my story. That's why I'm writing this at 3 a.m. with one eye on the peephole and the other on my packed bags that I can't actually use because I have nowhere to go and no money to get there, and also because Gerald installed a new motion sensor in the hallway that beeps directly to his phone whenever I move. I'm not a prisoner, I'm a tenant. There's a difference, apparently. A very thin, very legal difference that I'm currently trying to figure out how to escape. If anyone has any experience with bizarre lease addendums, or if anyone knows a lawyer who specializes in I accidentally died and now my landlord owns my soul, please DM me. I'm desperate, I'm also never playing dead again. Lesson learned. Some conversations are worth having, no matter how uncomfortable they might be. Because the alternative, the 3 hours of silence, the ambulance ride, the CT scan, the legal purgatory of being simultaneously alive and dead, is so much worse. What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. Today I've got for you story from Reddit updates. Subscribe if you are new.